for university, to live on my own for the first time, to experience residence life and be surrounded by like-minded peers and study at such a great school. I was really excited. I just had such a pep in my step, especially in the beginning when everything was going really, really well. And then quite literally, I was actually hit by a car. I feel like because I learned to rely on myself from an early age, I just developed that self-awareness because I was always sort of checking in with myself.
Kellyanne is an associate portfolio manager at Canaccord Genuity and looks to help families make an impact. She facilitates intergenerational wealth through philanthropy and familial longevity.
You have to provide value to the world. You have to be good at something. You have to.
Before we let the stories of the past shape your future, it would mean the world to me if you could follow us or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to us. Enjoy the conversation. So, without any further ado, Brandon, let the stories of the past
shape your future on the
Quoting Life podcast. That's awesome. So, the first thing we like to ask our guests typically is about their early upbringings, because I'm a firm believer that if you look into anyone's story and you look at their earlier moments in their life, there's probably some hints that you can find that would explain the person they are today. And so I'm really wondering, is there anything that I could find in your childhood or upbringing that would help me better understand the person that's standing in front of me today?
Wow, we're diving right into it. So, if I'm fully honest, and this is a story I haven't necessarily shared, very broadly, but if I were to really think about what my origin story is, I would say it is this. My sort of defining moment in my youth or upbringing actually was in my first term at UBC. And, I remember being incredibly excited for university, to live on my own for the first time, to, experience residence life and be surrounded by, like-minded peers and study at such a great school. I was really excited. I just had such a pep in my step, especially in the beginning when everything was going really, really well. And then quite literally, I was actually hit by a car. So, not to make light of it in any way, but more so to explain, that there was sort of an event that really derailed that positive trajectory. My mother and I were actually passengers in a car accident. And, that taught me very early on, a month into first year at 18, that life doesn't go to plan. And for me, I think as someone that had always prided myself in achievement and, being great at school, I think part of that also is being the firstborn child in an immigrant family, that experience, and the reason I sort of credit that with who I am today, and having to manage the physical impacts of the accident, the stress, seeing my grades slip, feeling as though I was failing in, what I always thought that I was good at and could do, that was really overwhelming. And the reason I tell that story now is because it actually sort of taught me, that it's really important to ask for help, and it's totally okay. And that's something that I would want to impress upon any student who is listening. If that's one piece of advice, that someone who is feeling overwhelmed in their university experience can then sort of take away and go, okay, like I can go through something that I never experienced, I never would have anticipated, and still come out very okay on the other end. And I think that's, like a job well done in terms of my being on here. But I also think that the second piece of that was teaching me the value of community. And not to get too long-winded, so I might wrap off or tie it off around here, there were a lot of actually faculty and professors that played a huge role in helping me get through that experience and recovery. And that sort of taught me the value of building the right community around you. And that really has shaped who I am today, why I value relationships so much, why I think picked a career where I can help people.
Yeah. There's a quote I heard that someone never truly lives until they nearly die. And I feel like I've seen it in a lot of people that I've interacted with where they've experienced this life-changing moment in their life when something just clicked and they began living with purpose, with more intent, and pushing to live out the rest of their life the way maybe their inner child would. And would you describe yourself as someone who had that light bulb moment the second the car hit? And I want to understand, like, how did you deal with your insecurity and your anxiety? Before we started filming the podcast, you mentioned thought work. So I'd like to dive a little deeper into that as well.
For sure. So, I'm not looking to be dramatic here, right? Like I'm not saying that I had my life flash before my eyes and it was not, that debilitating for me. Obviously there were physical impacts, but it was not nowhere near like that. So I'm not looking to exaggerate, but I think that it was just really pivotal because I think I don't necessarily want to generalize, but I know that for me at least, and I feel like this might be echoed for a lot of young students who are looking to sort of achieve, I feel like when you're in high school, it's very easy to get caught up in the idea that, you are what you achieve and that you have to provide value to the world. You have to be good at something. You have to, have something that signifies who you are and your excellence and your skill. And I think going through that experience taught me that I'm not just my achievements. And if my grades slip or if I, have to take an extra year to graduate, that's totally okay. And I think that was such an invaluable lesson because moving forward, as I mentioned, you can never really anticipate what happens in life. And so if you live your life expecting things to go a certain way and you are very easily shaken when they don't, I think you're up for an uphill battle. And to bring it back to the thought work, which I think, might be good to sort of dig into deeper at a later point, just because I don't want to sort of be long-winded. There is a process that I had mentioned to you that I use when experiencing an emotion, because, emotions are actually just sensations in your body. And there's a difference in terms of emotions and feelings are sort of the conscious thought behind how you make sense of that emotion, and a process that I've learned over the years in managing my mind. And I think that's sort of one of the biggest secret weapons that you can have. So I'd be happy to talk about that later.
Yeah. And I can definitely relate to having the feeling where you're kind of defined by your achievements, especially during the university application process. Because to get into the Sauder Business School, I know they focused a lot on grades, they focused a lot on what you did in the community and what did you stand out in. And I feel like for some period of my life, I didn't know if I was doing these things because I simply wanted to, or if it was the external pressures from having to do that in order to realize some achievement or goal of mine. And I'm wondering, like, how do you deal with that? How do you take a step back and maybe look around a little more often, do some introspection, and not be so rigid on having to do something just to meet the standards of others?
Because I think to add to Brandon's point, it's like, it's easy to say that, don't let, achievements define you. But then, me and Brandon are both in Sauder, and then, the only thing they look at is grades. So then how do you balance that?
You guys are both in first year, or you just completed your first year?
Just
Yeah, we're
completed
first year.
Okay. I mean, first of all, I think I mentioned this. I think it's really admirable that you're doing this. And I also think it's, incredibly smart from the perspective of looking to build out your network and, foster and nurture relationships with professionals. So kudos to you guys for doing this and reaching out. I think it's funny because when you asked that question, Brandon, something that came to mind was an article that I had recently read. I'm not sure if it was an article or a blog post. It was by, I believe, Mark Manson. And it essentially brought up a question to sort of reframe the way that you make decisions and go about your life. And that was, what are you willing to struggle for? And what I like about that is I like the concept of, everyone says that they want to be happy, they want to be successful, they want to be admired or wealthy or achieve X, Y, Z. But when you boil down to it, are you willing to struggle for it? As in, like, is it worth enough to you where you're willing to sacrifice, you're willing to, forego that night out with your friends, or you're willing to forego that holiday? I think for me, that's a really great sort of short question to keep yourself grounded and maintain perspective of the bigger picture.
Mark Manson is absolutely one of my favorite authors, and in The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, that's one of my favorite messages. And it's really something that really hit home for me. And my mentor said it the other day, but your life is defined by the quality of the problems you have. And I think you really echo that. But kind of stay on Mark Manson for a second, since you're aware of his work. One of the most interesting things I think Mark Manson tackles is how someone defines success. And as someone in the financial space, I can't help to think that success is often defined by how much money you have. And I think you may have a different perspective on that. And so the question to you is, how do you define success?
I mean, that's a great question. I think that my answer to that has also changed over the years as I have not just, I think, grown up as we all do, but as I've witnessed, the clients that we work with. I've been very fortunate to work with clients who have all obviously, built significant wealth through years of hard work and from completely different walks of life, which is also really fascinating and inspirational to see. And to me, success is when you have the means to live a life well lived that you choose. And I think maybe to sort of touch on what I do and how that makes sense with it, I really like to tie up and boil down what we do on our team, And, the reason that I love what I do is because I really do believe that what I do at its core is helping clients use their wealth to empower a life well lived for themselves and their families, right? To be able to live the legacy that they want, to have the lifestyle that they desire, and to know that if something were to ever happen to them, their families would be okay. And to me, that is success.
You mentioned working with a team, and I know you partner with Darcie Crowe within Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management, and it's one of the more nationally renowned wealth management groups. And I believe you entered that straight out of solder. Recently, I was talking to some other, I guess they'll be considered wealthy people with high net worth, and they mentioned how wealth management is a lot of relationship building. It's like building deep relationships with individuals where you can gain their trust and kind of work as a team and in a way be a part of their family in terms of securing their future. And I want to see what are your experiences with relationship building? Do you have a particular story of how you potentially found a client and built these long-term relationships?
So, I appreciate the kind words about our team. And yes, I am an associate portfolio manager with a group called Crowe Private Wealth within Canaccord Genuity here in Vancouver. So, as you alluded to, we work with accomplished individuals and families across the country, as well as in the US and globally, really, in certain cases, to help them grow and protect their wealth and secure their future. I like the way that you sort of tied that up and described that. And so I know that for us, we have really long-standing client relationships. And when I say we, I'm really speaking about Darcie, who you mentioned, and I'm very fortunate to be able to work and learn and grow alongside her for the past 7 years. And she did hire me straight out of Sauder. It was probably actually, I interviewed with her, I think a week after I finished my classes. I think I finished my classes on the Friday and I interviewed on the Monday or Tuesday. And that was nearly 7 years ago now, which is crazy to believe. And Darcie has really taught me how to build long lasting relationships. And I really think it boils down to, understanding that we are in the advice business, which means that relationships have to be prioritized above all. And to us, we really sort of align everything that we do and evaluate outcomes in really, I think, everything that we do in our work through that lens. And I think that really helps you make sure that you are, walking alongside your clients. Because for us, for example, if we were to look at last year and to say, okay, well, we grew our assets under management and we've increased the number of clients we work with, to us, that means, okay, we've achieved our goal of helping our clients, delivering value to them, deepening our relationships with them. And that is a success. It's not about any of the dollar figures that could be behind that or the numbers. It really is sort of using that lens that is very client focused and client first.
Yeah. Normally, to form relationships, I think of putting on a smile, being friendly, and bringing the energy. Do you find any additional things that your team potentially does to build these relationships? Do you have any tips you can share?
So, when I try to think about that, it's hard to think of something in the sense that I think that our team, Darcie and I and Morgan and everyone that we work with, we all just have such a genuine passion for people. And so there's nothing that I really am thinking of in terms of, like we do this, right? Like it sort of is just wanting to do the best that you can for clients, really enjoying those relationships. And for me, I think I'm inherently energized working with people. I'm definitely someone that is energized by relationships. It's energized by meeting people, being able to help them, speak with them. And so that drives me. I don't think I could ever be someone that, sat at a desk and typed away at a computer all day. I like the fact that I get to speak with clients and their accountants and their partners. And I think for us, a way that we make those relationships sticky and last is because we deliver on, what sets us apart. And I'm happy to sort of go into that. I think there's maybe two pieces that set us apart.
And I'm really wondering, because you mentioned two pieces there, and I'm going to go ahead and try and guess what those two pieces are, because from when I was doing research about Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management, I think there's two things that really shook me. One was the relationship aspect of it. And the second thing that I came across from reading about your values page was entrepreneurship and how you have a lot of freedom in the work that you actually do. And those two things struck me. And I'm wondering if those two things are exactly what you're talking about.
So it's actually very aligned. I would 1,000% agree. I think that Canaccord is, there's no place else that I could imagine working at. And I think that does come down to the entrepreneurial culture, being able to really feel as though you can drive what you do in terms of, picking the best product, the best strategies, the best services for your clients. So that ties into the entrepreneurship. And I also think that ties into the relationship piece because you can authentically work with clients knowing that you are putting the best outcome in front of them. And so what I was going to say is, our team is fortunate to have been recognized nationally over the years. And I should again say that really is Darcie. And I've just been learning alongside her and growing over the years under her. But she has really been recognized for two things, which are sort of been our institutional sophistication of experience and product. And that ties into I think, independence, as many would say, because since we do have the freedom at Canaccord to not have proprietary products, there's no Canaccord branded, mutual funds. we're able to select the best strategies. And so we are really known for our alternative sort of asset strategies. And then the other piece being the relationship piece. And what I mean by that is, the depth of service that we provide to clients and being able to focus on our specialization, which for us is actually being able to financially support individuals and families through life transitions like divorce and loss of spouse and things like that.
I think something you mentioned there when you were kind of trying to put the things that every successful person requires, like hard work, a good mindset. I think something a part of that maybe isn't talked about enough. I think successful people have an amazing capacity to manage stress. And I think that through the nature of your job, you've probably developed an interesting mindset in terms of being able to manage stress. And I wonder if that's part of the thought process or, how you deal with emotions that you spoke about earlier. And I'd really love to see what that process is like.
Yeah, so I know that for me, I think growing up, I would let stress and I guess perfectionist tendencies sort of overwhelm me in certain instances. And what I have found really helpful in terms of having a thought work process, and this is something that I've been working on for years, since university, when I think about the way that I used to be stressed, for example, for exams or for projects, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, and thinking about the way to handle stress. Now, I really think having a framework and being able to step back and look at the bigger picture is helpful. So the process that I was mentioning, and I will try to be a little bit brief, but we can also dig deeper into it if there's areas that you think might be interesting, is essentially recognizing that if you have a thought and that it might be unhelpful, walking through a process. I actually journal every morning and, generally every evening as well, but not necessarily as regimented on that.
Can I ask you how you journal? Because I journal as well, and I'm just curious if you could dive quickly into it. Like, how do you journal? What do you journal about? It's just like your thoughts? Because I know that's what I do. I just sit down and just start writing whatever comes to mind. I wonder if there's something like you start off with a question, or I wonder how that process goes.
So that is actually considered to be a very helpful way of journaling in and of itself. The concept behind just writing your thoughts is sort of like a pot where you don't want to sort of boil over. I follow a little bit more of a regimented process. I like to start by journaling, how I'm feeling, and then journaling what is causing those feelings. So if you're feeling happy or stressed or, and if that is because of, friends or lack of sleep or whatnot, moving into the thoughts that you're having. And again, to maybe make it more helpful, focusing on if you're having an unhelpful thought. So if you wake up and you're feeling really insecure and, that is probably an unhelpful thought. And then the next step is exploring what cognitive distortions you might be having in order to create that thought. So for example, are you catastrophizing? Are you sort of magnifying the negative? Are you acting very emotional? As in, is that a very emotionally driven feeling rather than sort of a conscious feeling? There's a list of cognitive distortions that I actually have, which, I can pull up later. And then from there, if you know that you have these cognitive distortions, how can you challenge that thought and reframe that thought? So for example, if you are feeling insecure, I guess to use a very simple example, if you're feeling insecure about your physical appearance, how can you challenge that thought, knowing that you are probably jumping to conclusions, which is a cognitive distortion, and reframe that thought? Well, then, you could journal out, well, actually, the facts say that my mom said I look pretty today, using an example, and generally the prompt would be the facts say, or the evidence suggest, or, it's not helpful to think this way because there's certain prompts that, I've found. And then reframing that thought. And the final piece is, what is another helpful way of looking at the thought and rewriting that thought out. So it's a bit of a like layered process if you have a negative thought, but I find that to be a lot more helpful to walk through. The process, if you have a positive thought, is more so magnifying it. So, if it's positive, then what are you grateful for?
So it seems like it's really all about self-awareness. And I'm wondering for students who are wondering, like, oh, how can I be self-aware? Like, people always talk about self-awareness. Do you have any tips? So journaling would be one. Do you have any other tips for being more self-aware?
So it's funny. I feel like as a child, because I found a lot of my comfort in interacting by myself in my free time. I was a huge bookworm. I would, read under the covers with a flashlight at 2 a.m. and pretend to be asleep when my parents opened the door and checked. So I feel like because I learned to rely on myself from an early age, I just developed that self-awareness because I was always sort of checking in with myself. So I think journaling is obviously a great way to do that. I think fostering and maybe carving out time for activities that make you feel happy is important in terms of nurturing, as they like to say, nurturing your inner child, but creativity focused. I think a huge actually tip now that I'm thinking about it, and something that really has helped me over the years once I started to implement this, is making sure that you don't betray yourself. What I mean by that is if you make yourself a promise, you keep that promise. Because if you don't feel as though you are showing up for yourself, you're not going to be able to go about the world with confidence, right? And this can be little things, but just if you tell yourself, I am going to, go for a walk today, go for a walk. And there's actually some, I think, tips I have in terms of, maintaining habits that we can talk about. But yeah, I think those are a couple tips.
Yeah. As a tradition on our podcast, we like to end off by sharing a quote from the previous guest and get your thoughts on it. And I believe this quote kind of ties into the mindset of how we should look into the world, but we like your opinion on it. And the quote goes, "Don't be a know-it-all, be a learn-it-all." And it comes from the CEO of Microsoft. So what are your thoughts?
I really like that. But I think, it's clear for anyone that knows me that I'm very learning focused. I really do believe that, I guess if you're not, there's such a cheesy phrase, but if you're not learning, you're dying. That's not my quote. Don't use that for me. But I, genuinely feel that if you wake up every single day trying to grow that extra 1%, I guess that is the 1% rule, right? Where they say that if every day you're looking to be 1% better, that is probably the best way to wake up feeling confident and happy about yourself. And I really think that a lot of who you are in the world and the way that you move about the world, the way that you look at problems and the mindset and the lens that you have in terms of it being positive or, scarcity versus abundance, things like that. I really think it stems from having that self-love, and an easy way to do that is to feel proud of who you are and what you're doing.
Thank you so much,
Thank you so much, Kellyanne, for your...
No worries. It was so nice to be part of this podcast, and I appreciate being on board and being able to share my story.
So much for making it to the end of this episode. As a growing channel, it would be so amazing if you would take 1 more minute of your day to reshare this episode on any platform you're liking. Hope to see you next week.